With that, we are now at 3 past the hour, so I'm gonna kick us off. Hello everyone, I'm Josh. I work at Feedly, and I've been here for almost, I can't say almost 4 years yet, for about 3.5 years. And I originally started out on the client team and then moved over into a more strategic role that enables me to engage in a lot of these community-based projects with the cybersecurity community, which I absolutely love. Prior to this, I have spent my entire career in private sector threat intelligence, worked in the geopolitical risk space, CTI space, and recently became a SANS co-author of a FOR 478 CTI Foundations course. So that's a bit about me. Now, let's look at our webinar topic. Today, we're going to be discussing how to manage burnout for a sustainable cybersecurity career. And as we can see by the chart on the right-hand side, burnout is a problem in our industry. It is something which around 38% of 400 respondents flagged as something that is limiting their analysts' effectiveness and career growth. So it's a topic which we're going to discuss in depth with some excellent panelists today. But first, I'm going to quickly talk about Feedly because Feedly is the organization behind the CTI sessions. For those of you unfamiliar, Feedly is a vendor in the threat intel space that specializes in open source intelligence and is moving into dark web intelligence. And essentially, Feedly acts as a platform that draws in around 10,000 sources from the cybersecurity space, processes all of them so that we can take all of this kind of the messiness of open web and structure it and tag relevant entities that are then added to a real-time threat graph. And from this, we have set up all sorts of tools inside the platform so that you can start to filter and access that intelligence from the threat graph. And this includes the ability to set up ongoing filters using AI feeds. We've got AI agents that help you understand like what's happening on the threat landscape, what kind of attacks have just emerged, and also what CVEs could be impacting your tech stack. And then we've also built some other AI-powered tools which have the benefit of context engineering because you are just selecting certain pieces of data or certain articles and reports, as opposed to writing a response and kind of hoping that the AI picks out some decent sources for you. And then in terms of the tail end of the Intel lifecycle, we've developed tools like the report builder and automated newsletters, as well as integrations and an MCP server to help get that intelligence into your stakeholders' hands or into other security tools where it can be further actioned. That is it. That is all of the Feedly conversation and product information I'll share today. Because I am very excited to talk about our panelists. Today we have Dr. Meg Layton, Sergio Caltagirone, and Dr. Daniel Shaw, who will be offering us their insights about the topic of burnout. However, I would love them to introduce themselves. So Meg, tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Dr. Meg Layton, Director of Security Architecture at Children's National Hospital, and I've been here about 5 years. Before that, I spent 20 years at Symantec in various roles within the company, including management of teams, both on security products that work on logging and event correlation, and working on the intelligence that fuels the frontline responders.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, Meg. Sergio, over to you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Sergio Caltagirone, and I'm the president and founder of the Threat Intelligence Academy, and I do that's where I do basically my professional training. But my actual full-time job is professor at Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology, where I teach graduate classes and advise students in threat intelligence, offensive cyber operations, threat hunting, and detection engineering.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sergio. And Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, Dr. Daniel Shore. I have a PhD in workplace psychology and an expertise in working with cybersecurity teams and leaders. Started on Homeland Security funded research and spun out my own practice, working alongside Coach Zach Broomfield, who's in the audience somewhere today. And we are professional trainers and facilitators, running sessions at SANS events and Black Hat and working with public and private sector to focus on the human side, the human layer of resilience, and really figuring out how we address what we're talking about today, which is what are the interventions to mitigate stress and pressure and hopefully alleviate that curve toward burnout.
Excellent. So as you can see, we've got some big brains in the room, and I'm very excited to bring you all together into a single webinar. But before we jump into the topic itself, I want to first begin with an icebreaker. And this is an age-old tradition on CTI sessions, and it's a finish the sentence game. So I'll start a sentence, and then you finish it. The first answer is the best answer, and there's no such thing as a wrong answer. So the start of the sentence is, artificial intelligence is... Daniel, over to you.
Something that we don't use enough of its capabilities for our advantage.
Very interesting response. Artificial intelligence is, Meg?
An oxymoron.
Intriguing. Artificial intelligence is, Sergio?
Far older than most people understand, and its current iteration is just one of hundreds that have existed in the last 80 years.
Excellent. Very interesting. I loved those answers. Okay, now we're going to pivot to our second one. My favorite de-stress activity is, Sergio.
Exercise.
What type?
I like to be on my bike.
Ah, nice. My favorite de-stress activity is, Meg?
Cooking.
Ooh, okay. What type?
Anything where I get to control the outcomes.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And Daniel, my favorite de-stress activity is
Writing down the small wins in my professional journal of things I accomplished in a day.
I like that. Great answers. Okay. And you can see how that kind of lends itself to the topic which we'll be discussing. And to break down the topic of burnout, there's kind of like four themes that I would like to cover over the next 49 minutes. And that's going to be the foundations of what burnout is, diagnosis, treatment, and then support. So I think it's very important we leave people with some actionable takeaways to help them deal with this problem. But first, we're going to ask an audience question to ensure that we are delivering the most valuable possible session, and that we focus the questions on what will resonate most with the audience. Why are you here? To answer this question, we're going to chuck up an audience poll question, which should be popping up in the Zoom. And with this, there are 5 options. The first one is you're currently feeling burnt out. You're experiencing early warning signs of burnout. You want information to look out for your team. So you could be a manager, director, or just a really altruistic colleague. You're in post-burnout recovery, or you're just learning to protect yourself in the future. So you've got more like a genuine curiosity and want to spend a long time in the CTI space. So those are the 5 options. We're going to chuck the poll up. Gabby, Sean, can you... I see a hand has been raised. It's probably best to put that into the chat. And I just want to quickly confirm, has the poll gone up? Okay, it's just emerged on your screen. So this should be a pop-up where you can leave your answer and we can see the results coming in live. And I'm curious to ask the panelists, can you see that I just dragged in the poll box? Okay, perfect. So we can all see the live answers, and we've got a really interesting spread. We've got people who are feeling burnt out with around a third of folks. And then we have second and third options are looking out for the team and learning to protect myself in the future. So with this, we've got a mix in the group, and I'll ensure that we spend time discussing all the elements of burnout in order to kind of address these folks from these different areas. I'm now going to stop screen sharing so that we can kind of launch into the more conversational part of this CTI session. And I want to first begin with a question that covers the foundations. What is burnout defined as? And for this, I want to first go to you, Meg.
So I heard an interesting thing last week that really stuck with me. And they said you could, and it was you can tell the difference between burnout and being too stressed because if you're stressed, you have too much of something, and when you're burnt out, you have nothing. And I thought that was really interesting because it sort of reflects how you feel as you're experiencing what that is. You have nothing left to give. You are done for in today's vernacular. I'm sure everybody has a much more clinical definition than that, but I really, really
Mhm.
liked the way that sort of reflected back.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very like relatable sentiment. But I am curious
But
about.
well, Josh,
So,
I'll jump in briefly to say, Meg, what
yeah.
I'm hearing you say is that it's a tipping point. It's when you've crossed that chasm and you go from having all of this burden that you're holding to having,
Having
just having
nothing.
lost the
Yes,
capacity to do that.
correct.
Interesting. And Daniel, to stay with you, how would you define burnout?
Well, I go back one step to, as Meg's alluding to, which is stress and how we're responding to the pressure, the demands, the challenges that we're facing. And then as those accumulate, you hit this, severe state or the tipping point. And I'd say one of the key pieces that comes up for me are the different avenues through which you experience burnout. So I think about them from the social behavioral side as emotional, mental, and physical, and that those operate in a ratio. They're not always in tandem or in sync with each other, though. So you might feel some emotional exhaustion and not as much physical exhaustion or mental. And so thinking about emotional, mental, and physical as three of the kind of prongs to the burnout fork.
Interesting. And now, Sergio, how about you? How would you define burnout?
I was So if anyone Googles it, or I mean, I don't know how even that, I don't know how long that verb's even going to be around for very much longer, but if you Google it, right, you're going to find the clinical definitions, right, that exist in the DSM, and also the World Health Organization has recently classified it and characterized it. Um, and I would just be a little cautious of those. They don't seem to, my conversations, they don't seem to match really well with what people actually experience. And they're very much for diagnostic and, purposes. So don't use the official I would recommend don't use the official definitions to diagnose yourself because it's not,
Hmm.
I don't think it's reasonable. And they are useful for professionals to do so, though. From my perspective, burnout is the accumulation of stress, anxiety, and the inability to manage response to stimuli that lead to failures and declination in executive and cognitive function. So basically, where you start becoming overwhelmed, you become overwhelmed so often that you can't control being overwhelmed anymore. Again, this is kind of more of a feelings definition on this side. And then that leads to the inability to prioritize, the inability to even get things done at all, to make even simple decisions become difficult. So on the symptomatic side, that's where I would define it.
Interesting. And I want to stay with you to kind of add a bit more color to this definition. Can you kind of tell us more about what burnout like feels like, what it looks like? Um, yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. I've there's I don't know. Burnout is here's the thing about burnout. And I've spoken of my own experience and others, so I can only speak anecdotally here. Um, but the burnout is not a burnout's not an event, which I think
Hmm.
most people think it is. Burnout is an accumulation, and then there is it basically doesn't necessarily go away. Um, and there's a lot of research around the the cognitive and physiological effects of the event or the accumulation of all of this stress and anxiety, uncontrolled stress and anxiety over time, leading to dramatic, honestly, physiological changes, especially neurological. And so the thing is that it's like a drug is a good way to describe it. It's not that you
Hmm.
take a drug once and you die, although that could happen. Most negative outcomes for drugs tend to be the accumulation of effects over time, and that's
Hmm.
what burnout kind of is. And it feels like you can't do it anymore is a good way to put it. And I
Hmm.
don't mean like you have these days where you get home and you're done for the day. We all have that. It literally means where you have that every day and you wake up and you don't know how you're going to be able to do it. And you don't know throughout the day what you're doing. You get lost. Um, and even small things become big things all of a sudden, and there's no more ability to adjust or manage your own reaction effectively. And in my life and other people that I've spoken to, this can manifest itself as difficulty sleeping. It can manifest itself as the inability to regulate your emotions. You get angry, very, very quickly as your stress basically becomes uncontrollable in an unreasonable period of time. Um, it can lead to dramatic and very serious depression, uncontrollable anxiety, high blood pressure. And then, of course, in my case, it ended up in physiological issues that led to surgery in the end to correct at least some of the physiological issues that I ended up dealing with.
And that's something which, credit to you, you've been very open about. Like I read your article about your experience with burnout more recently than I would like to have. And it's a piece that was very impactful when it was published. When I read it, it's still as impactful. And it's a an article that I recommend people review if they're going through burnout or want to understand like more of like the what the experience looks like. Um, it really is a high impact article, and I commend you for writing it so honestly because it's a very difficult topic to be open about, something which I don't, I'm not comfortable entirely being
I
open
appreciate
about.
that, Josh. And many don't. And I wrote it because I saw my friends going through very similar things and not knowing what to call it or not having the words. And as I've gone through the rest of my career, many people, I'm not even joking, not a week goes by without somebody contacting me about it, having read my
Mm,
post or remembered it and reaching out and saying, I didn't understand it at the time I read it, or I just found it and this matches exactly what's going on with me. Or I didn't know until later what it looked like, but now I see it from your perspective. It's every week I get somebody, and it's very difficult to see so many people with struggling.
yeah, and we'll put a link to your article in the chat for the audience. And then I do like want to come back to the problems in our industry, but first, Daniel, I want to go over to you. Same question, like what does burnout look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah, I want to kind of ride the wave that Sergio introduced here, which is what it looks like is it's often invisible. It often doesn't look
Mm,
like anything. It often is something that's totally normalized, and you look around and everyone is experiencing the same challenges or the same physiological or psychological challenges, and so it doesn't look like anything. It looks like work. It looks like
mm,
what you're supposed to be feeling, and in some cases what you're supposed to, like, part of the sacrifice that you believe is inevitable. And while some of that sacrifice is inevitable, it's more nuanced than that. It doesn't have to be till you hit the tipping point. Yeah, there's going to be an amount of stress and burden that you take on, and so that normalization is really tricky when I think
mhm,
about what burnout looks like, and thinking about these symptoms. um it it's hard because if you're starting to see the symptoms, you might already be past a certain point of recovery, at least in kind of recovery that you can incorporate into your day-to-day flow or practice because you're losing patience, you're not recovering, you're making decisions in a rash way, and you're disconnected. And sometimes disconnection is while you're around people, and sometimes you isolate. And so, like those pieces, and to Sergio's experience, like what you see, if you can see any of it, and then where you're at in the process, and kind of going with the poll that folks filled out is like some people see themselves as being burned out, some people see themselves as trying to get ahead of the curve, and with compassion, I say you might not know where you're at on that.
Hmm. And staying with you, Daniel, you've done a lot of research on like burnout in the cybersecurity industry. Why is burnout relevant in cyber in particular?
Yeah. One, back to the theme of the moment, which is the normalization of all the things that cause burnout and the symptoms and the inability to see it because it is so prevalent and I might even say pervasive or invasive with a
Hmm.
negative connotation purposefully. And when you're operating in the environment that is constant notifications across numerous platforms, it's a persistent threat. There are, of course, external adversaries. There's plenty of tension inside organizations. So we have what I refer to as internal adversaries, and then you have your individual adversaries, which is when unintentionally or intentionally you get in your own way of trying to navigate these challenges. And there's no training that I know of when people are coming into this industry and as they go through their early careers to prepare them and to help them see and gain visibility on what's invisible about stress and burnout. And
Hmm.
so, the high the intense focus on technical skills and the I would say extremely unhealthy assumption that the technical skills are sufficient, uh, to manage everything that you are encountering. Not to mention this pairing of, existential threats to organizations and to people and to lives that each individual is carrying, and their social and civic responsibility. There's some other research that of folks who I'm acquainted with that has focused on how much cybersecurity professionals in general want to help and serve, and yet the sacrifice and the burden of doing so is you can't prepare for it. And so when you're not prepared for it, just like any incident or crisis, you end up trying to react. And if you don't have the tools and the visibility and the knowledge, and some of those habits, really, then you're gonna crumble under that. And I
Mm.
I would say one thing I want to make sure is very clear that this is not a personal failure. This
That's a
is
good point.
this is a condition failure, a systemic failure of our inability to prepare, our unwillingness to acknowledge, and ultimately, the lack of resources to support people. And so, while people are feeling burnt out or they're fearful of being close to or on their way toward burnout, like it is not you. It is
Hmm.
not you. There are individual differences in how you approach it, and when you hit that tipping point, though, everyone is susceptible because of the conditions that are in this industry.
That is a excellent point. That's really worth underscoring because I think a lot of us do take it as like a personal failure if you can't like keep doing the job. Um, and like part of that's like ego and pride, but then part of it is just our like sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So it's all kind of tied in to
And
our employment.
and you look around at your colleagues and you look around at leaders who are absorbing, absorbing, absorbing
Mm.
without acknowledging, without asking for help, without admitting any sign of, for the term that comes to mind, weakness. It is not weakness. It is a simple like imbalance of any human's capacity to the amount of burden that is coming at them.
It's a great point. Meg, I want to turn to you now. Are there are there like different types of people, different roles that burnout impacts more in cyber?
Um, Always very tricky because I suspect people handle it differently. So a lot of it has to do with sort of people's personal journey, and sort of their own attributes as to how that comes. I think everybody in cyber is impacted by the fact that, you know, there's no end to security. Security is just always a state of being, and there's always something to do. And um, a lot of that work is unseen. Nobody comes to you and says, "Wow, really great job
Hmm.
protecting us that day." It's like they don't, that's not a thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that like there's those like everybody shares that common experience. I think that particularly in our organization, there it's tricky because I have yet to meet somebody who hasn't encountered something different than they were expecting. Either they figured something out bad about people, the people are the organization is not what they thought it was. Um, there's a negative thing, and so if you come in idealistic, as most of us do when we start young, we come in and we're like, "Woohoo, we're solving the world." When you discover these bad things, there is often not a place to put them. You're not often at times a lot of us aren't allowed to talk about some of the work we do. We're not allowed to sort of bounce that experience off people. I think we just sort of absorb this now negative thing that we know, and it sort of goes into our brain as negative things that we know,
Hmm.
and those pile up. So I do think that people who have been here longer maybe have more negative things
Mm.
that we sort of walk through life with. And I think that as we said, we all want to do good. A lot of us want to, like, that's why we're in this. We are mission driven, but we find these things out that sort of color our perspective, for lack of a better way. And then when you top that on top of other things, I think being a female in the industry is difficult. I think, being a person of color in the industry has its own challenges. I
Hmm.
think everybody has their own challenges and things they're working through, and we don't often um, reflect those in each other in a way that is super helpful. So it's one of the reasons I work with mental health hackers, because that is hackers helping hackers in a way that we share that experience and can at least reflect some of that back to each other. Does that make sense?
Yes. It does make sense, and I really commend the work that you're doing with Mental Health Hackers. This is an organization that exists to support those of us in CTI, sorry, in cyber in general, with services to help with their mental health. And I do want to talk about that more, but we're going to save that more for the support portion of this webinar. We've spoken a lot about like what the problem is and the foundations, and I want to kind of turn our attention more to like what we do about it. So let's think more about like diagnosis and treatment. And the first thing that I want to discuss is the diagnosis of burnout. Like how do you, if you're feeling burned out, like how do you actually get a diagnosis to validate that this is burnout? What does that look like? Is there a medical definition? Do you go and talk to your doctor? That's many questions, but yeah, let's start there. If you're feeling burned out, how do you go about getting it diagnosed? And Sergio, feel free to open us up here.
Yeah. So I've been dealing with this now for over well over a decade, unfortunately. Um, it sucks to have something so dramatic happen to you like less than halfway through your career that becomes a real way that you have to change how you think, how you do your work. Um, the medical community is fairly, I mean, I'm not even going to, this isn't even an unfair statement, is extremely naive and ignorant of this problem, to be honest. And I'm not calling anybody stupid or nobody's trying to ignore it. It's just that in the realm of things that exist, this is not very high on the list, nor is it something that medical professionals are generally trained on or even introduced to in any way, shape, or form. They don't understand how you would diagnose it to even begin with or what you would diagnose somebody with. As I said, there's very, very recently, I don't even know the date, but it was in the last within the last decade, right? That burnout was actually defined medically, again it's defined as a psychological condition
Hmm.
in the DSM, and that's and so medical diagnosis would have to come through a psychological condition, psychological symptoms, basically. And it's, by the way, the definition is exclusively for work. It is not, it doesn't deal with any other parts of your life, which is weird because this is something that affects every part of you as a person. And yet the diagnosis is simply, oh, you can't work anymore, or you don't work well anymore. Like you don't work
Hmm.
good is kind of the description, right? And that's
Yeah.
stupid. It really is. It's completely naive and kind of ignorant of the actual problem, which is why I kind of really disagree with how the medical community has addressed it. Um, and so talking to your doctor is you might get lucky, but you're probably not, to be honest. And again, I don't want to be unfair to the medical community. It's just the way it is. It's just the fact of it. The other thing is that almost everybody I've spoken to, burnout affects you both physiologically and psychologically. And those also can include psychosomatic symptoms, which, to be honest with you, doctors are ridiculously bad about discussing, because it's almost impossible to diagnose effectively, right? Because the ability to identify it, understand it, and diagnose it is really hard. Um, so the fact is that I have a psychiatrist. I have a psychologist that I work with to help with stress and control. And I have, of course, my traditional medical doctor. And all of them don't know much about it. And I've tried my hardest to find people, and they don't. And of course, there's nobody to treat you holistically, right? So
Hmm.
if I'm having a psychosomatic or physiological response to stress, I have to go to my medical doctor who diagnoses me with high blood pressure, right? And then I go to
Hmm.
my psychiatrist, and they're like, "Oh, you have just general anxiety disorder," not understanding that there's a full amount of medical literature on chronic stress, burnout, and stuff that these are just symptoms of this actual condition. And so you're going to have to work really hard to you're going to have to manage this yourself, most likely. It's just I'm just letting you know what the situation is. You've got to take control of it. You have to say
Hmm.
enough is enough with what I'm experiencing. I'm hurting myself, I'm hurting others around me. I'm going to do something about it. And then you have to put in the work yourself to do it. You have to marshal, again, psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, and you have to be the one to advocate for yourself. They're not going to be able to do it for you, and it sucks. And
Mm.
that's where the challenge is that when this is happening to you, there aren't a lot of people there who know what to do, and the people who are supposed to know what to do don't. And it becomes a challenge. So I ended up having to go through years of work with a medical doctor, um, basically being like, "Oh, you just have high blood pressure. That's your problem," or you have a sinus infection. We're gonna do all these things to treat a sinus infection, right? Nobody once in my entire life up to that point asked me about stress. Not a single time.
Mm.
It was ridiculous in the end. I look back on it and I'm like, that's a very, very poor outcome, basically. And it is unfortunately the common outcome. So I'm giving you my story basically to tell you you've got to put in your own work to make your success happen. And I know that sucks coming from somebody in the middle of burnout, because that's the last thing you actually have the ability to do is manage it yourself. You don't. That's one of the problems with the condition. But that is
Hmm.
unfortunately the way that you have to fight it to get to where you need to be.
I appreciate the candor with that response because often it's tempting to kind of like to give a rosy perception of things in like a webinar situation, but sometimes situations do just suck. However, I want to emphasize that the folks here, you aren't alone dealing with this problem, and we are going to be covering like a lot of like support avenues out there, and resources which are like readily available. So I'll make sure that we make time to discuss that. Daniel and Meg, I want to give you a chance to weigh in here. When it comes to diagnosis, for people who are feeling burnt out or like experiencing the early warning signs, any insights or advice on how they can get get a diagnosis or how to diagnose a burnout. And then I will turn attention to a couple of the audience questions.
So I think the thing about especially burnout and sort of chronic stress, as Sergio was talking about, is that it feels a lot that it's happening to you, but it's often also impacting the people who share your life in ways that you may not see because you're very focused on you. So the way that I sort of handle it for myself is by leaning on my support system. Of course, that
Hmm.
infers you have one. And I recognize not everybody is in that exact same situation, but there are those opportunities to have those conversations with the people who surround you and say, I'm struggling. Here's how I think I need support, and open that conversation in a way that helps you. As Sergio said, you sort of have to self-advocate. As a manager, I try to pay attention to people around me. And I have to admit, I am a huge advocate for employee assistance programs. As a manager, there's limited things you can necessarily do, but you can point your employees in the right direction and say, I wonder if you're struggling a little bit. Have you considered, right? And hold those discussions in a way that they don't feel they don't feel like it's a negative to them, but that you're letting them know other resources are available and that you're recognizing there might be a struggle there. And I think that's important because again, everything impacts you. If you're having a health issue, that may negatively impact you. I had an employee once whose son was a teen, and his son's best friend experience is super negative, and we just sort of talked about it, and I pointed his whole family at the employee assistance program because, well, I can't help in that particular situation. I recognized help was needed. So I do think that
Hmm.
like providing those opportunities to um, understand people are having issues, and try to reflect back to them other places that they may go for additional support is
Hmm.
huge.
Yeah, no doubt. And Daniel, I see that you're typing a response to a question. Let's bring that response out verbally because I think
Sure.
it's a great question. How do people here manage the urge to respond as soon as possible? I think this is also a big cause of burnout. So Daniel, over to you.
Yeah. Step one is thinking about why do we have the urge to respond? And I say these with compassion. It can come from wanting to do a good job, from wanting to be the first to give an answer. It can be tied to ego. And I don't say that from egotistical standpoint. I say it from an egocentric standpoint that like I know I have a job to do and I have an ego about that job and I want to do it well. It also comes from insecurity, from imposter syndrome of feeling like you're supposed to have an answer, from the pressure of simply needing to answer that so you can get to the next question or to the next response. And so, when you think about what's driving burnout from those sources, the framework I fall onto is intrinsic motivation or self-determination, which is I want to have ownership. I want to be part of something. I want to contribute, and I want to be competent at what I do. And so, the urge to respond, it isn't necessarily about you deciding not to respond so quickly. Again, you got to look at the conditions, look at what the leadership is modeling. Is there psychological safety? Do I feel like I can say, I don't know, let me look into that? Can I say, I don't know, let's ask someone else? Uh, can I say, I'm not ready to respond yet? And so how do we develop some of those tools, some of those habits? And again, it's not only the individual responsibility, it's also the culture or environment that people are working in. Um,
Hmm.
and so I would say, if you want to get specific, figure out where you're responding for you personally, and for the person, thank you for asking it. Where are you responding as soon as possible? And ask yourself a few self-reflective questions of why, of what are the alternatives, if there are any that you see, and figure out how you can gain some control over that urge, over that response, so that you can start. It's going to be a process. These are habits. These are the way people are wired, and
Hmm.
also the conditions that you're in. So, not a
Point.
simple answer to, a pretty straightforward question, because this stuff is hard. And I want
Yeah.
to make sure, Meg said this in our pre pre-webinar discussion. Remember, you are not alone in that urge to respond. And I think you're framing it as a collective challenge. Please know that it is a collective challenge.
Um,
Hmm.
I want to add really quick a couple of things that have worked for me, and that's all I can say here, right? This is not a therapeutic plan for general people. This is what's worked for me. So, and worked because of years of therapy, basically, to learn and build these techniques. Because it's like any skill, it takes practice to do this, by the way. This is not this is not like I need to go talk to somebody, right? That's where it starts, right? But then you have to build skills to manage this. And as Daniel said perfectly, right? A lot of this is introspection, right? But I want to share a couple of things that on top of what Daniel said, right? Which is that I've learned, which is one, consider the alternative, as Daniel said, but think about it from a consequence perspective. Does it matter if you respond? What's the consequence gonna be? What if you respond in a day? Is that going to change anything? If you respond tomorrow, does that matter, or 2 days from now, right? Does it matter if you respond at all? And what's the outcome going to be, right? Is something bad really going to happen, or is it just something you fear because of, as Daniel said, some ego-based motivation, right? Which
Hmm.
I think was a fantastic way of putting it. Another one is you have to start building the skills to manage others. And I don't mean as like a
Hmm.
manager, but as a helping them learn what you can and can't do and what is feasible and what is infeasible, is a gigantic one. And in the world of management, as we call it, right, we would call that managing up and managing laterally, right, which is how
Hmm.
do you manage your manager? And then also how do you manage those across your organization who might be asking you to do things, right? And I think those things are really important to reframe the question as to not in terms of what do I need to do, but what happens if I don't do it, is a
Yeah.
really powerful question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to jump from that to some other audience questions because we've had some great ones come in. Um, let's think about recognizing burnout in yourself or in other people. What's one early warning sign that a direct report might be burning out? And think about those members of the team who are like super hardworking, super enthusiastic. Um, and then what is one early warning sign that we can recognize in ourselves that we should definitely not ignore?
Poor emotional management, especially if it changes over time. That would be the big thing. They get more irritated, more frustrated, more angry. They start doing, they start making outbursts where they weren't before. That is for me a very classical, excuse me, classical.
And
Good
sometimes
point.
people come in with that as their baseline, especially if they're coming from another job where they burnt out and they're looking for, fresh air, and
Mm,
instead it's just recycling through the vents.
point. And Meg?
Yeah, I agree. I think I tend to watch for tone and sort of their engagement. That to me is usually sort of the if the tone has changed and now they're, I don't know, blunter than they were before. Like it doesn't
Mm,
necessarily come out as angry, it comes out as less thoughtful. than perhaps the
Yes.
way they did before is how I would phrase it. And sort
Yeah.
of just their engagement in team meetings, if they were always there before and now they're not. I think it's a tricky place when you're trying to separate out the hardworking and enthusiastic versus they may be hitting the peak and coming back down. Yeah, I think
Mm.
that those become like it sort of depends on how well you know the person as to tell where they are and sort of that continuum.
And
Yeah. And
also there are some things like taking time off, and keeping track of, where your people are at in terms of that. Time off, days off, calling in sick, those types of things. Of course, there are some boundaries with HR of what you can know about why folks are
mm,
taking that time. Though it's important to notice those patterns as well, and especially if you see it across multiple members of the team, that's a responsibility of leaders to acknowledge as well.
yeah. Good flag there. And so what I'm hearing is emotional regulation. If that suddenly changes in yourself or in someone else, that could be a big indicator. Let's think about protecting ourselves and kind of doing something about burnout on an individual level. What habits help to prevent or treat burnout during a high pressure incident response period? And this is an open floor. You can pick one habit each.
So I'm an
Oh,
obsessive note taker. That helps me
interesting.
a whole lot because it gives me a checklist and I can keep referring back and I feel like I haven't missed things. So,
Hmm.
and I always do it manually, like I don't typically do it on a keyboard because the act of writing helps me sort of calm my brain a little bit. And I think a lot of us find that in journaling and some of the other things that we have experienced. So for a high pressure incident response in particular, I do that when I'm on call and
Hmm.
things like that because it helps me revisit once the pressure is off in a sensible way. That's sort of my habit. But again, like habits are a super personal thing. So it's very hard to say to somebody, try this, it might work for you because if that's not a thing that resonates with them, they're not visual, they're not somebody who finds that act of handwriting useful, it won't work necessarily work for them.
That makes sense. And I'll just put in one of my ones. I know like the one solution doesn't fit all boxes, but there's a if when in high pressure situations, there's a 10-minute stress reframe guided meditation that I do before work every day. But if you're like in a high pressure incident situation and you don't have like time to go out to the gym or go for like a nice walk, taking 10 minutes just to like sit and like meditate, I know from experience it helps a lot.
And Josh, I'll add one thing, which is getting precise about where that pressure and stress is coming from and trying to mitigate the highest source of pressure as at least as you identify it. So is it
Hmm.
from decision making? Is it from trying to coordinate? Is it communication? Is it a lack of information? Is it kind of your own isolation? Like where's that pressure coming from? And then addressing what at least in that moment seems to you like the greatest source of pressure so that you can get more precise about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because that's
Hmm.
a sense of autonomy, again, that control piece that contributes to resilience, both in the moment and also longer term.
Okay, interesting. And Sergio, is there a habit that's helped you in these like really high stress situations?
Yeah, so I love what Meg said, by the way. It's strange, but handwriting is really, really good. And it's not only beneficial for stress management because it slows you down, it's actually taught as an intelligence analysis technique, which is to write manually, because it forces your brain to slow down and think more clearly. And it's a very, very, very beneficial way of improving your analysis, honestly, during even any event. So it's a good, it's actually really a good tactic in general for
Hmm.
mental capability. The other thing I would recommend is, um, and might sound a little callous, but care less. Seriously, you're protecting data. You're not actually saving lives in almost all cases. It's just not true, right? As much as you think that the mission is important and critical and world saving, it's probably not. And you've got to answer that honestly, right? And you have to not just answer it, you have to internalize that answer, um, which is it's just data. As much as it sucks,
Mm,
as much as there is real harm, and I'm not saying there's not, it's probably not, it's honestly probably not worth your own life to some extent. Because I mean, this drove me to, I would have, and I'm very clear about this, I would have ended my own life. Like, there's no doubt.
mm,
Every doctor and I, right, we all recognized it, right? I wouldn't be around today if I wasn't able to manage this. It's probably not worth that. And so don't
mm.
make it worth that. It's not. Don't give the bad guys so much power over you. It's stupid if you think about it. So don't let that happen.
Yeah, that is a really, really strong, salient point there. Like I, not on the same scale, but I remember once I was going through a very stressful day back when I was working for an in-house CTI team, and like I was just at my laptop, like raging with stress, and then I just asked myself, I'm like, for what? Like you're physically like in a really bad headspace, um, for a bank. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, like to the heads of this organization, like I'm a line item in like their HR budget. Why am I taking on so much personal stress and grief? Okay, we need to talk about support out there. So for this last portion, I want to transfer as much information as efficiently as possible to our audience. So slightly shorter, sharper answers, but just to begin with. For folks feeling burnt out, what should be their first port of call for support? And let's go with you, Daniel.
Well, there are some individual differences of where people's comfort zone is, so I don't want to overcomplicate the response. Um,
Hmm.
as Sergio said, while it's unfortunately an industry-wide and environmental challenge that people are being exposed to and susceptible to, it is an individual's responsibility to do what you can to change that for yourself. And as Meg alluded to, reaching out to another person who you trust, whether that's someone related to work or not related to work. And then I would also recommend, and we'll send out some resources around thinking precisely around where can you gain some control, some ownership? How can you celebrate some small wins along the way so that you're not waiting for, the end that does not come? Um, and
Hmm.
and then also, what can you do to ask others for help while also providing others with help? And, the civic and social responsibility of so many people in cybersecurity is interestingly in contradiction to how people often isolate themselves. So
Mm.
think about and remember what drives you and what your mission is in that regard, and reach out
Yeah,
and help others even when your capacity is low, because the reciprocity of doing that can really help you.
it's good. It's a good point. But I guess like if I'm a CTI analyst and I'm feeling burnt out, let's say I'm like quite like junior on my team, like who do I talk to? Um, who should be my first port of call?
Probably not someone inside your organization.
Oh, really, outside. Okay,
I,
interesting.
I, I would turn outside. Meg,
Okay.
what's
I
your
I
what?
tend to agree with that. I think there's a level of anxiety that gets added on if it's people within your own organization because you don't want them to
Hmm.
to to see you differently. I think there are so many opportunities for people who at the very least understand where you're coming home from. Mental Health Hackers has a Slack channel. Where is your community that's not in your organization, but is something
Hmm.
accessible outside? I think that's where you go. I am stressed. I'm not feeling connected to my mission. Typically, I use things this way. I think part of the challenge why people struggle, especially now, is a lot of adults are sort of responding to what they needed 10 years ago and not necessarily recognizing that the world fundamentally changed 6 years ago. We are
Hmm.
no longer interacting with everybody else the way we did before 2020. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And that means we
Hmm.
need different um, ways to interact, different support systems, different ways to identify those people that you can call in an emergency. And that means reaching out on social channels and other areas where you have a trusted space, but you do have to identify that trusted space ahead of time.
Valid point. And I do want to come back to mental health hackers before we wrap up. But Sergio, I want to ask you, based on your experience, should people be talking to a doctor, or sorry, a medical doctor, to a psychiatrist, therapist, or a someone who works for like a charity or NGO?
Talk to who you feel safe talking to is the answer. And that's the first step, right? That's the first protocol. The second thing I recommend, again, based on my kind of decade plus of having to manage it myself, a therapist is actually probably your best help in terms of giving you the space and clarity you need to make the decisions you need to make. They're not going to coordinate your care, but they can help you find and identify what you need to do it. That is really, and then you can then go to see a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, whoever else you need to go see. But I have found that a therapist helps me at least identify what I need to do better than I can do it myself.
That is a really useful takeaway there. And then Meg, to end us on a highly actionable next step, there is an NGO specifically set up to support people in cybersecurity with mental health challenges and struggles, including burnout. Tell us more about mental health hackers.
Sure. So that's an organization that was started a couple years ago, specifically for this reason. It is easier for us to support each other if we have a way through it. You will find us frequently at conferences. I do a lot of the B-sides on the East Coast. We'll have a space that is a village space where we'll have fidget tables and sort of trial tables and craft tables and somewhere to come and sit and talk to people about things you might be struggling with. We have educational information. We have things like that. We also have a Slack channel. I think we have a Discord channel. I don't know. I'm not frequently on Discord, but let's say yes. And really is just about us supporting each other because a lot of the challenges are so unique to the industry and frequently recognized by others in the industry.
I love that. And thank you for the work that you do with mental health hackers. I've put a link to the website and the LinkedIn page inside the chat. And then Daniel, Sergio, final question. Are there any free resources that you can point us towards or any other like organizations that you recommend people check out if they're experiencing burnout?
Read or listen. The audiobook itself is also fantastic. Thrive by Arianna Huffington. Probably the best book ever written on burnout, to be honest. No doubt. She was found unconscious in her office the next morning. It went that bad, right? And had to be rushed to the hospital. And she writes honestly and critically about it and what happened and what she had to do to face the challenges that she had. It was eye-opening that it was so blunt and effective, her way of communicating. So.
Yeah, and she did an interview with Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO about the book. So if you're a podcast person, that's another way to consume the information. And sorry, Daniel, to bring us home, any final resource to highlight?
Happy to share out our resilience framework and our quick hitting pressure points diagnostic so that people can get a sense and add some precision to what they're experiencing. And always happy to connect with anyone via LinkedIn or email and be a resource. Be a Black Hat, some other conferences in Europe as well, and looking to be part of the support and community, and really inspired by what Meg and Sergio are bringing, and Josh, you as well for having us. Like we should be doing this often and together.
Thank you. I appreciate that. With that, folks, I'm going to wrap us up. It has been really insightful speaking to you all. Thank you so much for the time that you've given us today. And we'll share out all those resources with folks who've registered. So we'll get information into your hands and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, all. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Josh.
Bye for now.